right, Wayne Doorband here. How's everybody doing out there in internet land and also here in the room? How's everybody in the room?
Yeah.
Good, all right. We got a pretty good crowd here today. The table's full. They're eating their lunches. Got Glenn Meyers here with me today, and I'm going to introduce Glenn in a little more detail here in a second. But first, wanted to just talk a little bit about our circumstances because we're going through a little transition. First, the rain just stopped. About 3 minutes ago, it was pouring, and we're in a metal building, and it's starting a little bit now. So you may hear that as you're listening to the webinar here. If you're listening to a replay, Leigh-Ann will probably edit it out. But in the metal building, right now, it's sounding a little bit loud to me as I'm speaking. So anyway, just so you're aware of that. Second, this is the last webinar we'll do from this location. We are moving. We're moving our operations from the two sites, this site and our ranch site, and we're consolidating everything up at the ranch site. And we're doing that for a number of reasons. One of them, big one, is cost. Quite honestly, it's a lot less expensive for us to not have the additional space we have here. Secondly, we just finished a big project which we were using a lot of this space for that we've moved out of now, and we don't need the space that we had for that. On the real exciting side, we're creating 2 new campuses, however, not here in the local area at all. One of them in Ireland with our partner Teresa Tierney. And Teresa is somebody, if you involved with us with social media, you've probably seen posts from her and so on. Teresa currently lives in New York, but she and her husband are moving back to her husband's home area in Western Ireland. And honestly, I've seen it on a map and I've seen a Google Earth of it, but I couldn't tell you exactly where it is. I know it's right very close to the largest lake in Ireland. And Teresa and her husband are going to be developing a campus of seed there, and we'll be doing education there and traveling there and working with them as they do that. And then even more recent development is that last week I was out in California in the Santa Cruz area, Watsonville. Let me see if anybody in the room, anybody in the room ever heard of Watsonville, and if you have, why might you have heard of it, and what might it ring a bell for you? Watsonville, California. Nobody?
No.
And it probably wouldn't have meant anything to me if I hadn't grown up in California. Does it, that area, does that name mean anything to you?
A little bit.
What is it kind of?
Isn't it tied in with mining?
No, it's tied into something that is in the sustainability realm, not mining. It actually, they claim and they say it is the lettuce capital of the United States. And 90% of the lettuce that's eaten in the United States, if it's produced in the United States, actually we get more of our lettuce from Mexico than we get from the United States. But of U.S. produced lettuce, 90% of it is produced in that Watsonville area. So it's on the coast, in between. It's in Monterey Bay. It's about right. It's on the north central portion of the bay, in between Santa Cruz and Monterey. So anyway, that's where I was, and we are creating a partnership with a group called Viridis. And Viridis has a 155,000 square foot greenhouse facility there, where they are probably the largest aquaponic food production facility in the United States. And I'm saying probably because nobody really publishes those kinds of things. But I've heard from third parties, not from them, that they say they are, but from others also that say they probably are. And their market is chefs all up and down the coast. They sell through farmers markets in the area, but their biggest market is the University of California system. So they supply most of the greens to the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is, I guess they have 53 cafeterias, 53 food serving locations on the University of California, Santa Cruz campus, which that's crazy to me. I wonder how many CSU has. Anybody that goes up there, anybody in the room, how many places you think that are campus run that you could buy food? I doubt if there's 50.
25.
Okay, so Susie thinks 25. So it is a lot, but 50 was just a big number to me. How about in Connecticut? What do you think, Joe? How many do you think you have around campus?
I think probably around 10, maybe a little bit less. I don't really know.
Well, anyway, 50 seemed like a lot, but that's. So anyway, we're excited about it. You'll be learning more about that relationship over time. So what I want to do now is introduce our speaker today, and Glenn's actually a local from the Denver area. We were going to do this over the phone like we do, or over the internet, and we had a little bit of some technical challenges, but maybe I should say I cursed his computer so he could come up here and be with us, because we've been friends for, I think, about 7 years, which is about as long as we've been up here. And Glenn actually did work with us for a short period of time and was doing video and helping us with some marketing back, again, 5.5, 6 years ago, right?
A while back.
Yeah. And he's continued on doing a lot of the same kinds of things he was doing then. He'll talk a lot more about that. But thanks for being here. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as you can see, we have an audience here in the room, and we have people online. And you know, if you guys have questions, as always, just sort of raise your hand. We'll acknowledge you. They're sometimes really shy, so you have to work it. Susie, in particularly, who says that. And by the way, most of our audience knows most of them. Actually, everybody but Emily, right? Was in the video. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Everybody but Emily. We did an interview, one of our webinars 2 or 3 ago, where we did it with the interns, and we were actually sitting at the table. So I was sitting up where Susie's at, and then everybody else was kind of in so we interviewed them there. So they've actually been through this.
Very good.
And so anyway, how you doing?
I'm doing quite well.
Good. Start out, just tell us just a little bit about what you're doing today. So what occupies your time on a daily basis?
Well, let's see. I'm involved with multiple things. Among them, I am editor and site manager for a blog called Green Building Elements, which focuses on green building, sustainability, materials, new materials, and energy. So out of that, I've been doing that for 4.5 to 5 years, and there's so much in the way of an archive for valuable stories about what's going on. I said I should probably put this together in a book. So that's part of what I'm involved with right now, and that is called Connecting Connections.
And is that going to be the title? Is that your current working title?
And I classified it as a knowledgeable story catalog of sustainable innovations that will impact climate change, quality of life, and overall well-being. And again, you people are championing great new innovations, and those need to be taken worldwide. So that's what I support. Anyway.
Well, you've been passionate about that a long time. On the book side, how much of it, when it's done, will be what you actually originally wrote versus what third parties wrote? Because you do an awful lot of the writing, or at least you have historically yourself. A
good part of it will be what I wrote. If I'm using other people's material, I have to get clearances, and that's a very time-consuming, arduous process. So,
how much of what you have written that is in these archives will you be modifying in the book compared to what you originally wrote, or will it be pretty much what it was? So you're editing.
I think it has to be, both for the reasons that it's dated, and my style of presentation will be different. If I'm thinking about something as a book as opposed to a blog, I look at it differently.
So when we met, tell everybody what you were doing. which is, let's say it's 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Oh, I was heavily involved, and 7 years ago we were in the midst of the onset of a huge economic downturn. So, which impacted me as much as anybody else. I have a long background in business journalism and have been involved in training. So, done a considerable amount of training products for corporations. Had a training company, training platform, and that suffered considerably during that economic downturn.
And you just told me before when we were chatting that you're still doing a little bit of that.
I still do a little bit of it, but I'm not going to the bank with that.
And when we initially associated, tell me how, I'm not remembering how we met. Did someone introduce us to each other? Do you remember?
I think you and I were at a green innovation group, one of the ones taking place in northern Colorado.
Okay.
And, we sat next to each other and found a common thread. And that you were involved with aquaponics interested me tremendously. Enough
So that, again, sort of mutually is what led to when you ended up working up here with us. And I think as time goes, it was right during the midst of that economic downturn. We ended up having to downsize some during that time frame. So, just as much as anything, timing was pretty important. I do remember, and tell me if this group still exists, because this might have been where we met. It was out of Boulder, and anybody that's around CU, anybody in the room or even online, there was a group that met monthly at CU at the law school that was green, innovative technology. It was a little bit like a local TED Talk type of thing where people could, was that where it was?
That could well have been, and that group is not in existence anymore.
Because the guy who was running that, who was putting a lot of his heart and soul into it, not getting paid anything, he actually at one point told me that if he didn't get some help, that he was not going to be able to maintain it. So it doesn't surprise me that wouldn't be on. But at one point, that group had 200-300 people.
They had some phenomenal presenters. And, I remember a young man, and in fact, I think you and I were at this presentation. A young man came and showed a pad of paper to everybody, or it looked like paper. It wasn't paper. He threw it down on the floor and he stomped on it and wrinkled it up, took it back, and it was a solar charging device, and it was from a company called Tough Stuff.
We were together. Yeah.
And that company, I tried desperately because I thought this is a phenomenal product. My interest is in third world spread of some of these new technologies in places like Africa, deepest parts of South America, India, Pakistan, areas like that. And I thought, this is marvelous. These people don't have electricity. What a great thing to share. I don't think they're still in business. I am sad to say.
So I'll share one little story. See, and you tell me if you were with me on this one. Because we would go, I think we did meet there, I think you're right, and then we went to several of them together. So I went one time when Scott Fardulis, who was with us at that time, is with the Institute of Economics, met this gentleman who was an inventor in the Boulder area. I think he lived in Lafayette, probably. We went to his house and we picked him up to take him. And quite honestly, there's no way in the world that this guy would have probably even left his house if we wouldn't have been there to pick him up. He was the consummate inventor. And he had a little yellow pad that literally looked to me like he never left his hands. And we went to this presentation, and in the entire presentation, I don't think his head came up. I don't think he listened to anything. I mean, he totally went with us because he was being polite. And I'll tell you what he did in just a minute. And by the way, the same thing. I think he just disappeared, and nothing ever came of what he was trying to do. But he would write, and he just was writing on this pad and never even looked up. And when it was all over, Scott and I was sitting on one side and Scott on the other. We said, and I don't remember his name. Let's say, Bob, what were you writing? oh, just ideas. And so he opens up the book, and it's just scribbles. I mean, there were formulas and everything, and this guy was just brilliant. And it had nothing to do, he did admit this, it had nothing to do with anything that he was hearing. He was just totally engrossed. So his concept, and what we were coming to look at, was a wind generator, excuse me, wrong, a device using the wind, not a wind generator, so a wind capturing device that would create electricity with no moving parts.
And
do you remember this?
Oh, yeah.
Remember this?
I even visited with him later.
Well, I'm going to ask the audience. That's a little bit of a riddle. Or how could you have a wind? What would the technology you could use with a wind capturing device that would create electricity very efficiently, by the way, without a moving part?
Ionizing particles.
You're close. It is in that realm, but you're not. I think you're thinking about it the wrong way. When I tell you, everybody's going to go, "Oh, yeah, I get it." But anybody else? Any ideas? Online, if you have anything, put a note up.
John Tuttle was his name.
Yes. Wow, good memory. And you did visit. You visited with him afterwards. Did nothing. Yeah,
who could say?
Well, anyway, here's what it was. It is taking wind, creating sound waves, having them hit what is the opposite of a speaker. So instead of having the speaker take energy, create sound, this is using the sound to create energy being collected by the speaker and then generating electricity. And then, so instead of energy coming to the speaker to generate the sound, this is having energy coming from the sound to the speaker and having it then go the other way. It's a little bit like a refrigerator operates with a compressor and going both
I
ways.
even wrote a story about his invention, and he was seeking funding. I mean, he had absolute proof. So he had this little tube that collected wind and had a light bulb next to it and it lit up, and it was just like, holy cow.
Yeah, and when I say sound, that it wasn't like a pipe organ, although that's the principle, by the way.
Right.
It wasn't singing to you. In other words, it would collect it silently, and the frequency was a very high frequency that you wouldn't be hearing, and that was the intent because there was more energy in a higher frequency. But anyway, that's what it did. And has anybody heard of anything like that? I don't think anything ever came of it. So
who knows?
Yeah.
I should get in touch with him again. But it's been a few years since I've seen him.
Wow, I'm impressed that you remember the name. And you're right, because as soon as you said it, that hit that was his name. So, as you know, because I gave you these, I try to sprinkle in some questions that are not quite as simple as sort of what we talked about, but I prepped you on a couple just to give people, so these will let people get a little sense of you. Let's say you're 15 years old, so take yourself back in time, and wherever you lived, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your home, where you grew up and stuff a little later, but and it was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and your mom's not making you do anything else, you don't have to work. What would Glenn be doing to just be having fun, just to be at that time?
Oh, I was doing two things. I was a baseball player and a golfer.
So it'd be one of those two.
One of those two.
So now let's fast forward a few years. It's now a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and you don't have anything to do that you have to do, and you can just do something at your leisure. What would you do?
I'm sure I would be putzing around in the garden.
Okay. So you have a garden at home, or do you go to
home.
Okay. What kinds of things do you grow?
Oh, a lot of flowers, vegetables, herbs.
Okay.
Love the herbs.
Do you have some perennial herbs that literally will persist, or are they all mostly annuals? That
Oregano.
Okay.
Which
those persist.
Oh, sure. Oregano,
Chives,
chives, all of those.
Yeah. Have you done anything more with aquaponics? Maybe not yourself, but I follow your blogs and such, and I'm not remembering a little bit, but have you followed any of the groups in Denver, JD Sawyer and some of the others? And just kind of in what they're doing? And
I'm interested in aquaponics and its application for feeding people. So that attracts me tremendously. There are some groups out there that seem to be more interested in aquaponics as a way to make money, as opposed to a way to pass along good. And so I haven't followed what's going on that much. I mean, there are a few people in Africa who've done some interesting things with aquaponics, but
any in places where they truly are serving just what you talked about as your passion, and as you know, it's ours too, helping teach people to teach others to feed themselves too. So what have you seen in Africa, for example?
Not as much as I would like. And again, I think the economic roadblock comes in there. It's like, okay, how can one bring a sustainable business to a place like Africa and share it with people in a valuable way? And you know this from what I was trying to do with George Nez and the Nez roofs. I worked considerably with a large gold mining company, Newmont Gold, and they work in smaller communities and relocate. They come to agreements with villagers and say, okay, we're going to relocate you so we can open up this new mine. Well, that sounds good for everybody. For the villagers, it's a great job, but you know, there is the issue of completely unsettling a tribe or a culture, and then they're giving them a new place to live. What do the new places to live look like? They look like American cracker boxes with tin roofs, I am sad to say. And it's like, and they cost a lot to build. And I took great offense at that. It's like, can't we build and design something that is not made in America by American subcontractors and tie in these communities, these African communities? And
just
that did not happen.
Leigh-Ann's showing, probably, are you showing it now, Leigh-Ann, or there's been on the screen one of George's roofs, and this one happens to be the one that's at the Denver Sustainability Park. And George Nez. So you tell the folks a little bit more about George, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more. An amazing man that we'll interview one of these times, by the way. So he'll be on one of our webinars. But give a George Nez a little bit of your.
George Nez is near 90. Dynamic as all get out. Thinks quite clearly. Has a huge educated at MIT. Has a huge background in community planning, and
was the first Denver city planner.
Yes,
he was the first Denver city
in 1958, yeah. And he quit that job to take a challenging job in Ghana, moving. I believe it was something like 80,000 tribal people who were going to, on a river in Ghana, the major river in Ghana, that they were going to make into a hydroelectric dam. So his challenge was, okay, how do we move these people, and how do we do it in a sane way? The solution he came up with was what he called roofs first. And that was to build the roof first, give them shelter from rain and vermin, et cetera, et cetera. And then they had the ability to fill in the walls. And he took that philosophy, still has that philosophy. He created something called a Nez roof, which is from a hyperbolic paraboloid. It's a beautiful roof to look at. It has some drawbacks because it's steep to walk on. But conceptually, he has been about the same business for the last 30 years, 40 years.
Right. And again, he's even under describing, this is a 90-year-old, and he is close to 90. I think he might be 88. You his energy, you would not think he was 60. I mean, he's that sharp too, and really does care, but has struggled, quite honestly. And again, I think you're seeing pictures of these roofs. They are steep. They're made from locally available materials. They can be made from wood that could be found anywhere where they might be able to be put up. They're cementitious with a mix that you can make, again, with materials you can get anywhere in the world. It will withstand hurricane force winds, incredibly durable. Cannot get engineers in this country to approve them. It's bottom line. It's crazy. Right? I mean, he struggled with that more than anything. We're going to build one up at the ranch, by the way. George has been trying to get me to do one, get us to allow. That's part of another of the reasons for the move, because it can be easily justifiable for us, because we're using containers up there to be occupancy in, and greenhouses, and all sorts of alternative structures, and George's roof needs to be a part of our mix. So.
He is a great thinker, and we need people such as yourself who are involved in the same sort of endeavors, because that's what's going to make the difference in the world that grows from here. So. And George is one of those people who beat his head against the wall with the United Nations, with USAID, etc., and committee meetings to the left, to the right. He wants to swear about committee meetings. He'd like to attend no other committee meetings. But we need people like that. And case in point, one of the people working with George is an architect in Larkspur named Doug Eichelberger, who created a video on that, and it's called Trash House. And this was back in the 90s when nobody was recycling plastic, and he took plastic pop bottles, plastic containers, and baled them and made a trash barn, and then stuccoed the outside. And it was a fabulous use of waste materials, but to a better purpose.
So I've been to to Doug's place. And so Doug has a barn. Doug's a horse fancier, and it's two different barns. One that is using plastic bottles and what are called gabion drums. Isn't that right? It's a gabion is the name.
The gabion drums are with rocks.
With rocks, but I think gabion can be more broadly interpreted. But usually people use rocks, and one of his barns is built with rocks, and then the second one is with plastic. There's a new initiative out there that I'm not remembering the name of right now. So I'll pledge to our audience, I'll get this for everybody, and we'll put it up in our notes. But I'm just forgetting the name, but it's really cool. It's a couple of guys that have started it, where they're encouraging people to make functional artistic structures out of waste plastic. And there's a name for it, and that's what I'm not thinking of, but here's the basis. You take 2-liter pop bottles that you find, and or water bottles and so on, but instead of just using them empty, you then, if it was a pop bottle with a narrow neck, you'd cut it off just a little bit below, so it's not an inch around, so instead maybe it's an 1.25 inches or something. You begin stuffing other trash into it, and you essentially make it into a brick.
Sure.
And then you get enough of those bricks, and then you make a structure that you then coat with a cementitious material, so they encourage groups of kids. So it could be a school, it could be a youth group of some kind, it could be a Boy Scout troop or a Girl Scout troop, and they've had incredibly successful projects. I can't remember the name of the group that's doing it, and they probably have 50 projects around the world right now. Just started a couple of years ago.
It's great to hear about.
Yeah. One of these other sort of, because I said it before, where'd you grow up? Kind of what part of the country or the world, and just tell us a little bit about your growing up experience, and a little bit sort of really professional, and sort of where you came from to get to today.
Denver native. Parents were divorced when I was a kid, so I spent some of my time in Flint, Michigan, where they used to make huge amounts of Buicks and Chevrolets. And it was known as Buick Town, and you would not want to see Flint, Michigan today. If you have been there, I'm sure you can attest to that. But, it was a town of roughly, I think it was the third largest city in Michigan at one point in time, roughly 500,000 people, and it's little better than a ghost town with factories that are abandoned. And you know, again, one of the problems with all of this stuff that's taking place today with the green movement, green building movement, green materials movement, is coming up with economic platforms that work for people. And you know, the working model has changed tremendously. People once went to work at Buick and they were going to be there for the rest of their life, earning however many dollars an hour they earned, and then they'd buy a vacation place, and that's just no longer true in America, nor is it true anywhere else in the world. So,
do any of you expect that that's the way your life would go?
Good, good. So then on the other end, I came out to Denver every summer, spent time with my father. I was a big baseball player, so played Little League baseball, then Legion baseball, and on and on and on.
Were you a Bears fan? Did you watch the Zephyrs?
I watched the Denver Bears, and at the time I was a kid, the Denver Bears were the New York Yankees farm club.
Oh, so who do you remember that came up?
They had Billy Martin. He
Wow.
played shortstop for the Denver Bears. Ryan Duran,
Sure.
Moose Scourin, people like that.
Yeah.
These are all old-time names, I'm sure.
How many of you even saw, that are here in the room, old Mile High Stadium before it was replaced? Okay. Josh, did I see another hand? Oh, Susan, okay.
I was sad to see him tear it down.
Well, what they did for baseball there is they moved the stands.
Yep.
Are you, Leigh-Ann's going like this, is that because you're hot? Okay. She's pregnant, and she's, you know, it is warm in here. They moved the stands and right field, correct? And when the Colorado Rockies started, that's where they played. So 1993. We're not talking, you know, eons ago, but they started and they played, I think, 2 or 3 seasons, 93, 94, maybe 95, and the right field stands would move, and that's why that stadium was so loud, because they were built on rollers, you know, and that's why it would just rock. But
the architect who designed that system was a gentleman named Charles Deaton, D-E-A-T-O-N, Colorado native, and he lived not far from Evergreen. If you've driven up Interstate 70 and you see a spaceship-looking house, that was his house. So.
Wow, see, that's a story I hadn't known. That was Deaton's house. Well, it was that.
He never lived in it.
He just built it.
He built it, designed it, and built it.
And not too long ago, I have no idea who owns it now, but it was vacant for a lot of years. But
it was in a Woody Allen movie.
It was in the Woody Allen movie Sleeper.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, really prominent. If you haven't seen it, it's really obvious. You just look up to the left. But that was vacant for many, many years.
Somebody with considerable wealth did buy it, and I think they're refinishing it.
So move ahead a little bit. So Denver native, and did you come back and go to school? I mean, you were back and forth.
I went to school, Western Michigan University, and I also went to school at the University of Colorado.
Oh, so you even broke that apart.
Even broke that apart. I worked briefly in the juvenile justice system in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and was convinced that the court was causing all of the problems with juvenile delinquents, that I could fix everything, and learned, and I had quite a bit of latitude with this job. I mean, my task was to take first and second time offenders and keep them out of the adjudication process. What I learned, I'm sad to report, is that the juvenile court raises families from juvenile delinquents to abusive or neglectful parents, and it goes on and on and on. And it's I kind of burn out after 2 years. So, and then I went in. I had building and woodworking skills, and I opened up a gallery in Kalamazoo, which was I built furniture and had a gallery in front. We had a great time.
When were you there? When was that?
Oh, this would be in the 70s.
Early or late?
Mid to late.
So I was there 2 different times in the early 70s, because if you remember, maybe it had changed by then, but it had been there. The Division II Collegiate National Tennis Championships were held in 1972 and 1973
at Kalamazoo College.
Kalamazoo College. I spent a week and a half there those 2 years, so, in the early 70s. Anyway, and did it stay there for a while? I mean, I
don't have ties with Kalamazoo.
But I mean, even while you were there, let's say by the late 70s,
it was there. Yes.
Yeah, it was a pretty neat place to come. You know, hot. It could be a little even in May or late. It was kind of late April, early May. It could already be warm.
Michigan is a schizophrenic sort of state. If you've been there, there's the eastern side of Michigan, which is pretty industrial. You've got Detroit, Flint, all of that stuff, and then and it's gray. It's very gray, very clouded. People who are allergic to sun move to move to Lansing, Michigan, the capital of Michigan, because it gets such a little amount of sun. On the other hand, western Michigan, where Kalamazoo is gorgeous. Lake Michigan is as pretty a spot as you'll ever see. It has sand dunes and quite a bit of sun, and winter is cold and it's humid. I like Denver much better.
So one of the other questions that I had that I said I might ask is tell us about a book that you've either read recently or any time that's sort of really influenced you, so that people in our audience might think about it.
I brought Leigh-Ann 3 books that I'm in the midst of reading, and they're all tied in with energy, energy or green building. And the one I'm in the middle of right now is a book by John Perlin called, what is it? It's the 6,000-year history of solar energy. And the title is Let It Shine, subtitle 6,000-year history of solar energy. And it's a great book. It's fascinating, and you learn, as I did. John is writing some articles for me on green building elements. He has these what are called solar igniters that people used to walk around with on their hip, about the size of my hand, and put it out to the sun, and it would ignite a fire. We have that same principle today. I mean, if you've been around extreme solar igniters, they're terrifying. I mean, because they will instantly ignite something. They can burn concrete. It's a phenomenal amount of power, and if we could learn how to manage that, that would be great. John wrote this book. If you want anything on the history of solar energy, that is a great book to read. So
cool. And books here in the room, and Leigh-Ann's been showing pictures of it, so they're passing it around. I was impressed that you either you had it memorized or you could see it. We were actually both sharing how, as we've aged, our eyes aren't as good as they used to be, and that book's about 30 feet away. So if you saw the subtitle there, that was impressive.
Close up, I need reading glasses.
Let's stay on something you brought up there. John's doing some writing for you. How tough is it to find guest blog writers? It's one of the things that we're just starting to do here, is to look for folks who would be interested in on our topics, probably lean towards the feeding side of things a little more. Mm-hmm. But how, as you go out and try to attract folks that will either write for you, it's probably easier to get an interview, but let's say to write for you. How difficult is that, and how would you recommend that maybe we do it or anybody else might?
Well, the first thing I'll say to anybody going down that path is there is next to no money in it. It is a, you're building up a SEO platform, a social platform for yourself or for whatever it is you're writing about. So, in terms of
I'm actually take it from the other side. So you're the one wanting to get them, not the person doing it, doing the writing. So is there any? You just find names that you like. I'm saying
I find names and certainly topics I'm interested in. Right. So, and of course I've badgered Wayne over the last few years because I'm always interested in aquaponics, and I would love to post anything about aquaponics. I haven't been around this facility, so Wayne was showing me around, and it's like there are some very good stories here, and both in terms of raising food, a low-cost way or sustainable way of raising food, the fish side of it. The fertilizer side of it. I mean, there are huge applications there that can be and should be spread elsewhere in the world. So anybody here who has expertise in that area or interest, I would love to have stories like that.
Yeah, I'm serious, all of you. And all of our interns do write blog articles on a regular basis. And it wouldn't take much to even just expand those a little bit. And if you get them to me, I'll get them to Glenn.
And people don't read much. Wayne and I hail from a time when people read books left and right. We are in a, people know social media. They know that very well. They know smartphones very well. They know video pretty well. But it's like, I'm not looking for tomes. I'm looking for short, engaging articles that generally are supported with either video or pictures.
How has that changed, by the way? That's a great one because I know you've done videography yourself. I know that's one of your skill sets. Do you find that, and you just said it, that an article with a video in it is probably even more attractive than one with pictures? Is that correct?
Video or strong pictures.
Either one.
Either one.
Okay.
Either one. And again, I will issue this. This is my perspective. I think everybody is buried with time commitments. Nobody has that much time. So for me to come to you and say, hi, I have this 300-page book or 500-page book, and I'd like you to sit down and read it. Do you actually have the time to do that? Most people don't, and I'm not discounting the act of reading at all. I think reading is a great escape. I think reading is a great place to learn, but we are all so busy with so many commitments, it is tough finding the time. So. And when you have communication tools like smartphones, it changes dramatically. And people say, oh, I learned about that on the web, on my smartphone, and poof, they were done with it in 3 minutes. And so you always need to think about that. How can you engage a person? How can you capture their interest? How can you sustain them? Because I hail from the video realm when once upon a time 10 minutes was a standard video length. Nobody does videos that are 10 minutes anymore. Unless it's a webinar, unless it's a training program, or unless it's some fabulous movie. That's a different issue altogether. So if I'm sharing information, I need to be very concise about how I'm doing that.
2 to 3 minutes of a video.
I think.
Do you have a quote that has inspired you, or something a person that said something that you just carry with you, or that's either recent or anything that you really like?
Oh, quotes. Since we've been talking about water, this is a quote that always stood out. It's a dying rancher's words to his son on his deathbed. And he says, "Son, sell anything except the water." And that is so true. And in Wyoming, Colorado, that is, we've always taken water for granted, as has most of the world. Water is going to continue to be a growing issue. And as we're expanding population-wise, we're coming close to 8 billion people. And you know what? I want to say 1/3. I think that's a little extreme. It's probably more like 20%. They're suffering from terrible water issues. Where they either don't have potable water, excuse me, or women from tribes are hiking 3 hours a day one way just to get crummy water for their families, and that is not right.
Yeah.
And here we are in the United States where people are watering their lawn. There was a book written many years ago called Cadillac Desert. If you're interested in water, I recommend anybody read that. It follows the Colorado River on its way from Grand Lake all the way down to Los Angeles, and what happens to that water as we have agricultural runoff. And if you've ever tasted the water in Los Angeles, it's horrid. That's why. There's so much saline content in it.
Yeah, it's got it up on the screen.
Okay.
Another sort of general question, because I love to hear everybody's perception of this. In your mind, when you hear the word sustainability, what does it mean to you?
Sustainability right now is a buzzword. So lots of corporations love that term. I think we all need to take a step back and say, okay, what is sustainable? What does that mean? I think we should encourage sustainability in anything we do. So I'm interested in energy. Sure, we've got solar energy, we've got wind energy. They're going to be here. We assume the sun's going to be here for at least a few million years. Those are sustainable, but there are so many other forms of energy that are sustainable. If you travel to Pakistan or India and you watch women go out in the field and collect cow turds and wrap them up in their hands and take the methane that they're creating out of that, and they are creating flames, and they have the ability to heat water, cook meals. We're horrified by that in the United States, but that is a common practice in India, Pakistan, and in South America. And cow poop is sustainable.
What about...
That's a roundabout way of answering the question.
No, that's fine. And I've got 2 more questions, and both of them are doozies, as they say. Again, looking back in your life, tell us about one event that occurred that at the time was negative, that turned into being, that because of it or after it turned into be something much better than you thought. So a negative event that ended up being something that ended up being really much more positive than you thought.
This man was my Latin teacher in high school in Flint, Michigan. And Flint was one of the last cities in Michigan to be integrated, to share classroom space with African Americans, Hispanic, that didn't even exist at that point in time in Flint, Michigan, or white people. And I had an acquaintance in high school who was racist as all get out. He hated African Americans, used every bad word you can think of. And we're in our Latin class. I was a 10th grade student in Latin. And Dale Kildee, who is a congressman, he's a United States congressman from Flint, Michigan. He was very articulate. And there was this tough-looking woman named Patricia Curry. She was black, and nobody wanted to mess with her. She was just a tough-looking woman. And here's my acquaintance who's sitting on the other side of the room, and Dale Kildee is talking about manners, and he's showing how a person goes up and a gentleman goes up and kisses a woman's hand. And he walks up to Patricia Curry. She was utterly embarrassed. Takes her hand, kisses her hand, shows the multiple ways that a gentleman might kiss somebody's hand. That always stuck with me. I had to laugh because, again, I haven't forgot it. I have not seen Patricia Curry, nor have I seen this gentleman since high school.
But you remember the names.
I remember the names, and Dale Kildee, I mean, he was a passionate humanist, and that's what he was demonstrating.
By the way, I had Latin in 9th and 10th grade also.
Oh, yeah?
Do they even teach Latin in high school anymore?
Italia est non insula.
Yeah, Britannia est insula. That was how our book started.
Yeah.
Remember, that was probably the same book. Italia
same
est
book.
insula, Britannia est non. Yeah. And I remember this stat, have no idea whether it's accurate, which is more than, I think it was 52% of English words are directly derived from Latin. So I mean, they're so close that just as the ones I just gave, Italia, Italy, est is insula, island. So they're so close that as you hear them, you'd think, wait a minute, he was just messing around with English. No, that's Latin.
And it's amazing how much I've forgotten.
Last question, then I'm going to open up for questions, and we'll be right on time to end up here. I call this the one that's the doozy. I called the last one too, but John Lee Dumas, so I always like to give credit, is a podcaster who has probably one of the more successful podcasts in the country, and it's called Entrepreneur on Fire. So he interviews entrepreneurs. He does it daily now. He doesn't actually do one a day, but he'll do 10 of them a day, but he broadcasts them daily. And he always asks this question. This is the way he ends, and I liked it so much that it's the way I typically try to end, and that is, and I sometimes phrase it wrong, so I'll try to make sure I get it right. Let's assume that you woke up this morning and you realized, you know what, I'm not where I was yesterday. It sure looks like Earth, but it's not. You appear to have your daily needs cared for. Where you're at has got all, I mean, it just looks like you're in a city, a similar place, but it's not. You figure that out pretty quickly, and you're speaking English with people, but it's just not. So you realize that this is very different. And all you have now, though, is the clothes on your back, a laptop, and $500, which let's assume that it's $500 wherever you're at is worth the same as it would be today. What are you going to do for the next 7 days? And all you have is a laptop and $500.
Being the energy socialist that I am, I would probably begin designing an energy garden and cultivating people to make and build an energy garden, because energy is free, and it's free in many places. And what a concept!
Yeah. So that actually leads. I'm going to ask one more, but you guys think? Do you guys have any questions? Think about it. Come up with some. You need to come up with. We have 2 or 3 minutes here. We can have, but I'm going to ask one. It's related to energy. Did you see, or did anybody see a video, and then it ended up becoming multiple people that went viral about a month ago for a couple in Idaho, northern Idaho. You know what I'm going to go to here?
I interviewed him.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you know what? Does anybody else already know what it is that I'm talking about? This guy and his wife, again, a guy probably close to Glenn and my age, not a young man, but has had a dream, a concept for some time, and believes very strongly that we can solve several problems, the biggest one of which is an energy related over the long term, by using solar panels, PV panels, incorporated into whatever the substrate would be to become our new roads. So as we replace infrastructure, where it could be all the way from your driveway, you know, to the street you live on, and he's done a lot of really good work on the graphic side of this. But you interviewed him now.
The man's name is Scott Brusaw, B-R-U-S-A-W, and if you want to go check it out, it's called Solar Roadways. He's an electrical engineer. I am blanking on his wife's name, and I apologize for that because she's part of the company as well. But he's created hexagons that are built with recycled glass, and they've been tested to take a weight of, I think, 500,000 pounds, which would live on any highway, I think. And he's created what he calls a solar roadway. And he's received funding money from the U.S. Department of Transportation. So he's on a demonstration project. Now, the problem I have, I think he's going to run into a ton of hurdles with this concept. I love the technology. And I took it a step further. There's a picture of Scott and his wife with his hexagonal platforms, and this is at their home in Idaho. And he generates a significant amount of electricity. And I said, when I'm interviewing him, he said, could I take those panels and just go into a neighborhood, a Denver neighborhood, and let's leave roads out of it for a second, because roads they suffer all sorts of problems. We know that. And so could we line our sidewalks and our driveways with this? And they defrost. I mean, he's a very smart man, so you don't get too much ice on it. And I said, so then could you create an energy garden for a neighborhood? And maybe that's not the only way you're collecting energy. Maybe you've got some wind generators in there. Maybe you've got a poop factory, compost, whatever. You're doing all sorts of good things, but this would be a foundation block. And
so how did he ask? What did he say?
He said, "Oh, absolutely, you could."
Cool.
And he's on a Kickstarter campaign. I mean, he raised $1 million+. So now he wants to hire a structural engineer, multiple engineers. And that's where I believe he's going to run into some difficulties with these panels as a part of a highway system. But I mean, I love what he's presenting.
And he's not just a crackpot, right?
He is not a crackpot.
Okay. Again, it's hard to know when you just watch a video and such. He sounds credible, but you interviewed him. So, well, we've come up close to our time. Come on, one or more questions from the crowd. Anybody?
You said you're working on new materials, new building materials. What's the most exciting or biggest potential that you've seen so far, or most interesting?
Any of the earth-based materials, straw bale houses, earth compressors, earth houses, those are very, very exciting. There's a company out in the Northeast, and I'm blanking on what state they're in, called Ecovative Design. And they have, this is not a building material, but it's an insulating material. The man's name is Eben, E-B-E-N, Bayer, and he has created an insulation that's made from mushrooms. And talk about sustainability again. He grows the insulation.
Wow. Now, could you be devil's advocate for a second? better value being insulation or better value being food? Those mushrooms, or maybe they're
I think those are not. They're not
edible.
edible.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense if they would be non-edible. Well, we're up against it time-wise. Let's round of applause.
Thank you.
Again,
thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. And just for everybody out there on the internet, we're going to take a 3-week break this time. This is that one weird time out of, I think, every 3 or 4 months where the first Wednesday occurs 3 weeks from today rather than 2 weeks from today. So our next webinar is on the 6th of August, I believe, and is with a lady who has a farmstead in the upper state New York area, who's done an amazing variety of things. She's a friend of Teresa's. Teresa's actually going to be traveling on her move to Ireland then. I hope she can get on for a while. But come back and visit us again then. Watch this on replay. Thanks to everybody in the room. And Glenn, thanks so much again. This has been great. Thank you. Appreciate it.